the street, and I never had encounters with police or anything like that. And you know, I would see what my cousins were going through. So the older I got, I knew that I was going to go to college, and most of them weren't. And a big reason why they weren't is because many school counselors to this day tell Black and brown people, like, you can't go to college, or, you know, you're never gonna make it out of this neighborhood. And what ends up happening in New York City a lot is that young people of color never actually leave their borough, ever. You know, so their frame of reference is the block, you know, or like 2 streets and stuff like that. Well, anyway, I ended up going to college in the state system, which is State University of New York, and I went to Albany, New York, which is the capital of New York State. And it was in college that I began to learn a lot of things about myself and my homeland, Puerto Rico. I grew up going to Puerto Rico every year. I was bilingual and always seeing my family there. But my parents really didn't ever talk politics, right? I didn't know that Puerto Rico was a colony. I didn't know that we had political prisoners. I didn't know that there was an independence movement. I didn't know that 1/3 of our women were sterilized when Johnson & Johnson was testing birth control. I didn't understand, you know, companies, manufacturing companies not paying taxes. All I knew was that we were American citizens, and kind of grew up very arrogant about that compared to other Latino people. You know, so when I went to college, like, it was like a blindfold being taken off my face, which led me to a lot of anger those first couple of years at school. But then I became involved as an organizer, and I started understanding like electoral politics more. I was part of a lot of organizations on the campus. I ended up becoming president of the largest Black student union in New York State, because in those days we were super active, right? Like, we didn't have social media, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't even have TVs in our dorm room. So all our time was really spent with students, like politicking and reading and consciousness raising. When I graduated, I became chief of staff for New York State Assemblyman, who's still there. And pretty quickly I learned how corrupt electoral politics is, and that was in the 90s. And that was also the time when Hillary Clinton ran for senator of New York State. And I remember being in a room with her and a bunch of other Puerto Rican activists and organizers that were telling her and her husband, Bill Clinton, that if they did not give clemency or pardon the Puerto Rican political prisoners, they could not carry the Puerto Rican vote, which was very powerful at that time. After that meeting, 3 weeks later, Bill Clinton pardoned 9 political prisoners, and they were they were out of jail. And 4 months later, Hillary Clinton became the senator of New York. So I understand electoral politics, right? But after I left Albany, I went and moved to Brooklyn and just did a various amount of things with organizing. I worked on police brutality cases like Amadou Diallo. We were always working to free political prisoners. In that early 2000s, especially after September 11th, a lot of our organizations were raided by the police. Our buildings were destroyed. We began to see, especially in Queens, like a lot of Muslim and South Asian men just disappearing and being put in holding. We were at that time also understanding the subprime mortgages, because I was living in Brooklyn and I was like, how are you giving like $1 million loans to people who are making like $30,000, right? And I started working on that issue. And now all of it has come to fruition, right? Like, you go to Brooklyn, and it used to be called the People's Republic of Brooklyn, and Brooklyn was the borough that had the most Black people in it in the country. And that has dramatically changed, right? It's been so gentrified that I go to my old neighborhood, which is Flatbush, which was like not a neighborhood people walked in, and I don't see that many Black people, right? Like, it's a little crazy. Can I get some water? Somebody in the back? Yeah. So I spent a lot of my time as an organizer. Thank you. I appreciate that. And so this is interesting. In 2006, at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, after September 11th, like 2002, there was a huge conference at the university that weekend on hip hop. And one of my friends, his name is David Muhammad, he's still an organizer in Milwaukee. He put this amazing conference together about how we can use hip hop as an organizing tool and as a political tool, you know? And it was one of the biggest hip hop gatherings at that time. And from that moment, I was like, okay, how are we gonna be able to like infuse electoral politics into the work, but not for the work of grassroots organizing to go away, but how do we reach particularly young people who are not voting and to this day really don't vote in the numbers that people would want. And in 2003, we held a convention in Newark, New Jersey. It was called the National Hip Hop Political Convention. Over 5,000 people came. It existed for about 8 years. And in 2008, we had the convention in Las Vegas. And about a week before the convention, Cynthia McKinney called me and was like, do you want to run with me and be my vice presidential candidate? And I said, yeah. I have been following the Green Party. I have been following Ralph Nader. There was a lot of critiques we had of him around mass incarceration. And I was like, yeah, because in reading the Green Party platform, everything that we want as organizers is in this platform, right? Like, we coined the Green New Deal. We talked about equality for LGBTQ people. We talked about a solution for Palestine. We talked about freeing political prisoners, about reparations. Like all these issues that are kind of like mainstream to talk about, the Green Party had in their platform. So one of the questions that Grace gave me said, what initiative made me run for office? And it was Cynthia calling me because Cynthia, when she was a congresswoman, held a hearing on the FBI's role in assassinating, as some people believe, Tupac Shakur. And not only did she have that hearing with the FBI had to release their records and say that they had been following him since birth, which makes sense because his mother, Afeni Shakur, was one of the Black Panther 9 in New York that were indicted and went through a trial, and Afeni Shakur was actually in prison pregnant at that time with Tupac, right? So it kind of makes sense, right? Like here's Tupac, here's hip hop, the growing influence of hip hop, not just the money part, but the political part. So it would make sense that the FBI was trailing him from the beginning to the end of his life. And then she had a other congressional hearing on political prisoners. But what happened to Cynthia, if people haven't seen America Blackout, you should watch that. Because what happened with Cynthia is that she was the first one to call a hearing where Donald Rumsfeld had to come and started asking questions about the war. A week later, the Congressional Black Caucus picked a Republican black woman to primary Cynthia McKinney, and she lost her seat, right? So then I was like, all of this is corrupt. Like, it's the Congressional Black Caucus, y'all are supposed to be Democrats, and you literally just ran somebody to get Cynthia out of office. So by that time, I was like, I'm so over like the Democratic Party, right? And I ran. And that was 10 years ago, 11 now. And I think about it a lot. Like, I was like, well, part of it was I was a little younger. I had just gotten married. I just had a baby 2 years before. I had covered Hurricane Katrina 10 days after it happened. And I was like, no, this will be interesting. If I could just get up there and talk about what we as a hip hop generation want is to win, right? Because obviously we weren't going to win, right? Like, it was very clear. And it was funny because a lot of people would be like, what would you do if you won? I'm like, we're not winning. We're not even on every state ballot. Like, that's not the point. The point is that we have to challenge, particularly the Democratic Party. So I had something I wanted to read here. So I ran. We were, oh my God, July 12th. Chicago, Illinois, we were nominated, and from there we were on the road. Me and Cynthia weren't together a lot on the road, obviously, because it's a small campaign. We didn't have too much money, and we tried to hit every state that we could. And we did. We went to almost every state, either one of us, but collectively together, except for Hawaii and Alaska. And, well, Puerto Rico's not a state, but there would be no need to go to Puerto Rico outside of, I would want to go there because Puerto Ricans on the island cannot vote for president, even though we're a colony of the United States. So, I learned so much on that run. Enough that I said I would never want to do this again. First, because the Green Party's racism to this day has not been solved. We had a lot of white men in the Green Party that tried to take us off the state ballots, and one did successfully, Colorado, because they did not like the fact that 2 women of color were running, and they would conjure up these images of like us, like we're gonna have guns and kill everybody and every white person. Like, that's the stuff the Green Party, many of the men were saying in the party. So actually our ticket didn't really have support from the steering committee of the Green Party, but we did have support from people. But it was also crazy, right? Like, Barack Obama's running, and then 2 women of color on the Green Party. Like, black people didn't like us, Latino people didn't like us. A lot of my friends were like, you'll never work again. And I didn't for 3 years. I don't ever say blacklist, I'm like, we were whitelisted. Like, a lot of things we were not able to do after we both ran. It was like we were almost like person non grata in a lot of places. And I used to be like, but Barack Obama won, like, why are y'all still mad? And it was more because we were challenging the 2-party system, right? And it was more about like, what audacity would this African-American woman and this black Puerto Rican woman think that they could ever run the country? Well, obviously now with who's in the White House, you could have done a hell of a better job, right? Woo! So, I wrote this article a month after the election. So this was December 22, 2008. One of my favorite writers and philosophers of all time is Frantz Fanon. If you haven't watched The Battle of Algiers, you should watch it because it shows what happens when there's an ideological response for liberation and actually the people on the ground fighting for liberation. And that was in Morocco. Each generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. It has been 45 days since the hip-hop generation helped usher in the first black male president of the United States of America. Since that historic night, many within hip-hop culture, like writer Greg Kot of the Boston Globe, entrepreneur Russell Simmons, artists like Common, Jay-Z, and P. Diddy, have declared President-elect Obama the first hip-hop president. In my humble opinion, they are wrong. It does not matter how many hip-hop pundits, nonprofit organizations, and recognizable figures within the culture declare it. Much like an MC or a B-girl battle, I'm ready to challenge that declaration. As a longtime community organizer and hip-hop activist and journalist, I have always followed the rule. Never allow someone to become your priority while you become his or her option. For President-elect Barack Obama and the entire Democratic Party leadership in this country, the hip-hop generation has never been a priority. We have always been an option, and that option is used mostly to get out the vote during elections. Efforts like Vote or Die, Generation Vote, Rock the Vote, Respect the Vote do not empower a generation. They are catchy slogans emblazoned on pretty white tees that offer empty rhetoric. At the end of the day, these GOTV efforts become guaranteed votes for the Democratic Party and often fail to educate their followers about candidates that run outside of the two-party system. I believe that, like many before him, President Barack Obama's campaign used hip-hop to create excitement amongst young people in this country. But we must clearly see through the $750 million marketing haze of his campaign. The few times he was pressed on his association to hip-hop, he spoke about offensive rap lyrics and always talked down to black men and black women, but black men particularly. He always said black men have to have respect for themselves by pulling up their pants, and then they will be accepted. I do not recall one specific mention of the political victories and social consciousness brought out by millions in the culture, especially as it regards mass incarceration. What we have now is an Obama administration that came into power with the promise of change, but is renixing that promise by sampling from the Bill Clinton presidency, including Hillary herself. And this new remix will do nothing to change the mass conditions of our people. In Van Jones' new book, The Green Collar Economy, Van says, "It is time to change from fighting against something to fighting for something." For me, that statement encapsulates why I chose to accept Cynthia McKinney's invitation to be her running mate, and why the Green Party made history by choosing us as the first woman of color ticket in American presidential politics. I accepted the call because I was no longer interested in fighting against the Democratic or Republican Party. I want to fight for a hip-hop political movement not dominated by white liberal politics or George Soros money. I want to fight for a hip-hop political movement that is African-centered, respects women as leaders, and believes in universal health care. A hip-hop movement that abolishes student loan debt. A hip-hop movement that fights for amnesty for undocumented immigrants and calls for the abolition of the prison industrial complex. We must all fight for a hip-hop politician. I need hip-hop to help free all of our political prisoners. I need hip-hop to care about climate injustice, as people of color will suffer the brunt of the climate catastrophe. We need hip-hop to end the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, to end the death penalty, and must create a hip-hop political movement that empowers working-class community, fights for a Green New Deal, and will never deny LGBT brothers and sisters their God-given human rights. Finally, I want hip-hop to uplift and support Black and brown women, to accept us as much-needed leaders, and to understand that as long as it continues to deny women their much-fought place in the culture, hip-hop will die. So this is what I choose to fight for. So yes, hip-hop. President Obama may be the first Black president, but he will not be the first hip-hop president. Only we, the people of hip-hop, can make that a reality. So I wrote that 11 years ago. And I'm not an arrogant person to say I was right, but I was totally right. And not just me. I did have a lot of my comrades, especially this brother, Dr. Jared Ball, who's a full tenured professor at Morgan State, and one of my comrades and people in the Malcolm X grassroots movement, like Khalil Kuno, who moved to Mississippi to start Cooperation Jackson, Laura Flanders, who was one of the few journalists that would interview me. So I look back at it and say a lot of support, and I look and read this, and 11 years later, it's exactly, we haven't moved the needle, right? And I understand particularly ruling on Citizens United has made it really difficult because we didn't have that to contend with, and now we do, as well as political PACs, right? And I also understand people's frustration at this point with the Green Party. I think what Jill Stein did after the election was a mistake that will probably never be over in the Green Party. When she decided to raise money, which is still unaccounted for, to do a recount. So after Jill did that, I wrote a very open letter to the Green Party, like, I can't support y'all anymore. It's a bunch of old people, sorry, not because I know my daughter could be like, you're an old person now. And I mean old and very antiquated. A lot of white men who feel aggrieved as like progressive and liberal white men, you know. And you know, obviously the narrative that Ralph Nader and Jill Stein is the reason Gore and Clinton lost the election, which is not true. But what Jill and that steering committee did really broke the Green Party. So I'm really not participating in electoral politics like I used to be. I'm back to more grassroots organizing, trying to finish my dissertation, and do a lot of work with younger folks, especially a new movement of younger people within Black Lives Matter and the Black Alliance for Just Immigration and Mi Gente and Dream Defenders. You know, and it's interesting because I was in Ferguson days after the rebellion and in Charlotte after the rebellion, and I see the frustration and anger in young people, not just working class young people, but those that have been have gone through the college experience and now are in massive debt, because I'm one of those people to this day that's in debt from school that I went to 20 years ago. So if I was to assess this moment right now, I live in upstate New York. Unless the Democrats do something radically different, Trump will be the president. And because like this area is not let's say a big city, right? Same thing in New York City and Los Angeles and Chicago. What people in those cities don't understand is what the rest of the people are going through. Albany is 2.5 hours away from New York City. From Albany County all the way to the Canadian border was Trump, right? There are people in my block right now that have Trump 2020 signs and Confederate flags. And that's upstate New York, you know, because people's imagination of New York is just New York City and it's super liberal. But New York City was never that anyway. Like, New York City is very racist. Like, I grew up in the Bronx, I never saw a white person until I moved to Westchester County. Because once you're past 96th Street in New York City at that time, it was all black and brown people. That has changed due to gentrification. But, you know, I can't even understand what is happening in these rooms right now with like Joe Biden. Like, everybody needs to be like, just go the fuck away. Like, yes. And I say that not as a Democrat, or obviously not a Republican. I'm still a registered Green. But I say that because the writing is literally that clear on the wall that if he were to become the nominee, it will exactly be like Hillary Clinton. And the number of young people in the last month that have called me, I texted, they asked for, like, what the hell? And Joe Biden is smart. He did hire Simone Sanders, who, I love Simone. She's just very wrong on this thing, you know? And of course, like yesterday, she had to be on every network being like, well, he worked with segregationists, but he didn't really like them. You know, and you're like, this is some crazy ass shit that's happening, right? Because it's like, oh, I know the guy, my cousin abuses women, but he's really not like that except for her. And you're like, makes no sense, you know? And the fact that there's still not an understanding, I don't think for people in this room, but in general, that the Republicans actually have no morality. So this weird argument all day, every day in the media, right? What's the right thing to do? They don't do the right, they're Republicans, they don't care. They will come in line and be in line, right? To win. So the idea that much of the conversation is, it's just wrong. Like, who is Trump? It's like he literally tells you who he is. He's not lying about it. There's something about working class people that like him, and I think I've analyzed it enough to understand. My family grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown, Ohio is very important for how the Ohio goes, all right? So my abuelo, my grandfather, was literally taken and from the U.S. government, and they asked Puerto Rican men at that time, do you want to go to the United States and make more money? So my grandfather was one of the first wave of migrants from Puerto Rico. And what they did, and there's many pictures that you can see this, they filled planes like cargo planes with no seats, and they strapped the men in, right, like sitting with these like weird straps around them, and they went to Pittsburgh Airport and landed. Then there would be buses there, and the people would say, do you want to live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or Youngstown, Ohio? My abuelo didn't know, so he said Youngstown, Ohio. My abuelo and abuela raised 16 children in Youngstown, Ohio on his one salary working in the steel mill, and then being a carpenter on the side. And they lived in a beautiful house. So my experience every year going to Youngstown was my abuela, my 15 aunts and uncles, and my cousins in Youngstown, Ohio. And one of my uncles to this day owns a business called the B&O, which is, it's an amazing space, and he bought it. So like every year I go visit them, and they voted for Trump. A lot of, so people are like, oh my God, Puerto Ricans voted for Trump. Yeah, they're in my family. Like, I know Puerto Ricans, other Latinos, I know Mexican people that are like, we should close the border. It's so, this racism and patriarchy and capitalism, hyper-capitalism, what ends up happening is what Trump is giving to people is hope in this way. If you vote for me, you can be me. If you vote for me, you can have as much money as I do. If you vote for me, your job won't be lost. And if you vote for me, I'll bomb Iran for no fucking reason, and I'll throw paper towels at Puerto Ricans, and I just care about us. And what we call that in hip hop is what the come up. Meaning, in hip hop culture, a lot of it is like, how can I get the next label? How can I get the next gold jewelry? How can I get and be rich? And if you look at Donald Trump's history in the 80s in New York, you can see every rapper with a picture of Donald Trump at one of his events. Because that's what he represents. And that's what we have to tackle, the mentality that being a hyper-capitalist is what makes your life be good, right? And that's what he does represent. And he also represents, like, all of this is a lie, and I'm going to tell you it's not. I'm just going to tell you the truth, and I don't really care. So in a real weird way, that has become refreshing to people that are disenchanted with the two-party system. Right? They look at Trump, they're like, yeah, he can lie and still be the president. Exactly. He can assault women and still be the president. Exactly. And young people see it. My daughter's 14. There's a school in Albany she goes to. It's called the Free School. It's been around for 50 years. They have one in Brooklyn, Chicago, and Puerto Rico. In fact, my daughter with her classmates is in Puerto Rico right now doing some service projects. And the day after the election, people were so distraught, right, everywhere, that the Free School said this is an open and free space for everybody to come in today. And we went as community members, as family members. My husband called out a job. We were telling people, like, don't go to work today. Like, we gotta, like, at least be with each other. And though that day, those students wrote this letter. And they put it on a big poster. We projected it on the state government offices. And they went around the neighborhood that day flyering. And they said, we are sorry that adults voted for Donald Trump. We love black people, we love brown people, immigrants have a right, poor people have a right to health care, LGBTQ people should be respected, we have to stop the violence against transgender people. And because you adults have messed it up, it's up to us. That's what they wrote. You know, and you're like, yes. You know, like, so in that sense, the reason I tell that is because young people are completely aware of what's happening. Even if we think they're not, they know exactly what's happening. And now, with the climate catastrophe, and especially after what happened in Puerto Rico, here's my daughter and more people that are, more her peers that are not Puerto Rican, but they're like, that's messed up. Like, he literally went there and threw paper towels. Yeah. So part of it is what we have to combat is the inertia of like analyzing everything at this point, right? Like Dr. King said, you can have the paralysis of analysis. And I think democratic people and independent-leaning people or third-party people are in the analysis part, where the Republican Party are in the like, we will rule the world part, right? As I was leaving here, I don't know if you guys heard, I don't know if everyone here heard, that the situation in these migrant concentration camps, as AOC called it, is to the point where the government yesterday was arguing, or Donald Trump's administration was arguing in front of 3 judges why kids can't have soap or toothbrush and toothpaste. The woman's name, she's incredible, I think is Branson Howard, was on CNN saying, in all her years of doing work and monitoring immigration facilities also across the world, she has never seen what she saw. She's saying that they've taken almost all the adults out, and it's the 11 and 12 and 13-year-olds that are taking care of the babies. The facility she went to 2 days ago in Clinton, Texas, there was a premature baby that was about to die. And she had to threaten the person running that with going live on Facebook while this preemie was about to die. So I think what it requires now is everything. Every tactic is needed. For people who want to run for office, yes. Do you? Let's support you. Let's support AOC and Rashida Tlaib, but let's also know that at this moment, the Democratic leadership is seeking to primary Alejandra out, right? They're already doing that. They're looking for someone in the Bronx right now that will run against her. I know that because that's the part of the Bronx that I grew up in, Soundview, and to this day my father has his business there. So I know what's happening in that district. They want Rashida out, they want Ayanna out, they want anybody who's going to question them, right? And even when they're questioned, their arrogance is. For those who want to run and upend the electoral-political system, let's do this. For those that want to go underground and be anarchists, let's do that. For those that are willing to stand up against KKK and white supremacists, let's do that. For our white accomplices in justice that want to be in the front lines and support black and brown people's struggle, let's do that. If young people in the streets rebel, let's support them as opposed to saying, oh my God, you just burned down a CVS. Like burning down a CVS matters when black men and black people are being killed every 28 hours with the police. And what just happened in South Bend, Indiana, 2 days ago, a white officer shot a black man. Pete Buttigieg didn't go to South Carolina. He went today and he was confronted. And people were like, do Black Lives Matter? And he's like, no, do Black Lives Matter to you? Yeah, all lives matter. You're like, really? We went through this 4 years ago with the all lives matter shit. Now you're trying to say you want to be president. And kind of that, I feel like I was arrogant in saying I was going to be vice president, but it's very interesting that young white men with like mediocre credentials could run for president. Then fuck it, then I'll run for president. Like, you know? Or my sister right here, you can run for president, and let's go. Yeah. You know? So, I'm not a cynic. I always believe that revolution is more than what we think. And lastly, this is what I always think. As I'm a historian by my discipline training. I'm finishing my PhD now from UMass Amherst. And this is what I've noticed, that our greatest leaders have never been elected to office, right? Well, obviously Harriet Tubman couldn't be elected for office, but Harriet would go back and she was like, man, if people knew they were enslaved, I could free a lot more people. Sojourner Truth, Lolita LeBron, Abisu Campos, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, you know, I could go down the line right now of people who have made worldwide impacting change, not just in the United States, but globally. And they have never been elected to office, right? So for me, that's what it requires. Every tactic to fight what is the onslaught of annihilation because of the president we have. The fact that he said, we were 10 minutes away from obliterating Iran, like what is happening? Now what's interesting is that he's the one that said no, but we know what Bolton and Pompeo are not politically active. Or like people in my family that have 2 jobs and they don't care, and they see Donald Trump as being like a breath of fresh air, you know? And it's hard and it's painful, but this is what we have to do. When we look at any social justice movement, it never starts with thousands of people. It always starts with a few people in a room that are committed to liberation, right? That's how it all starts. That's how the Black Panther Party started with Huey and Bobby Rush were at, not Oakland Community College, I forget the name of the college where they founded the party. The Young Lords, the American Indian Movement, the Weather Underground, who broke off from Students for Democratic Society because the Weather Underground was like, y'all are not doing enough as white people, we're gonna have to go do some revolutionary stuff, right? Like, it's never thousands of people that make change. It's the committed few that build a map of how we can get to where we wanna be, right? And I'll close with this, and please ask me anything after. Before Puerto Rico happened, Hurricane Maria happened in Puerto Rico, I am very clear that I was not like climate catastrophe is at this level. Because it's funny how I grew up as a Puerto Rican in this. In our household, we recycled everything. So if you go to any Puerto Rican household in the 80s or 90s, there would be an avocado pit that was growing another avocado. My father would bring home the aloe plant, and anytime he was sick, he would, heat it up, and the aloe juice would help with the ear infection or whatever. My mom always had, even when we were in the suburbs, and she could have bought more oil, she always had the little Café Bustelo. And you'd be like, why are you keeping that, this oil? She's like, no, we can use that 5 more times, So I began to think, like, when did particularly African American, Latino people began to be known as people who don't care about the environment? Our whole life has been about using the land, recycling, what that means. And I think part of it is because, it became a marketing campaign. And then it was fronted by mostly white people, and you got this crazy notion that it's like only white people that care about the environment or the climate catastrophe that we're in. But when I walked in here, there were no lights, right? How long was there no lights here? An hour or two? In Puerto Rico, there are people who didn't have electricity for a year, okay? I went down to Puerto Rico 10 days after, and I took a crew of younger Latino, Latinx people with me. And to see the devastation my people went in was one of the hardest things ever. But I also went there on a mission to report. And one of the things we first reported was that the government was lying about the number of deaths. Every day, I would go to the governor's press hearing, Rosa, who's a Republican, basically, and he would stand up there and lie. So one day we went to OWR, which is in the middle of Puerto Rico, one of the places that was hit so bad because it's very mountainous. OWR is also the home of Puerto Rican independence, as well as the home of many minerals. And what the people were telling us is they want us out of here so they could mine everything. So we were covering that, and as we were coming down the mountain, we see a man walking, and I was like, let's just stop and ask him some questions. And he tells us, I work in the not coroner's office, I work in the home where we get bodies. And he said, in OWR alone, there were at least 400 deaths. So we're already past the 67 that Rosa and Trump was saying. Puerto Rico has 77 municipalities, times that by 400. At the end of the count, Harvard went and did the research that everybody started hearing 4, 4, 4, 6. But Harvard was only able to go to 10 municipalities. That's why when all of the toll is counted, we're looking at over 10 to 12,000 deaths. Triple that of Katrina, triple that of September 11th in New York City. And now the suicide rate has doubled in Puerto Rico. My father's best friend 4 months ago committed suicide. He spent his whole life working in the Bronx to retire to Puerto Rico. When the hurricane came, he lost everything, and he just was so depressed, he killed himself. My aunt's leg had to be amputated because her whole house was wiped away. I went to see her in the hospital, and really the only way they let me in was because I pulled like the American card. I was like, oh, I'm from the United States, and they were like, okay, you could come up. But I had to wear like a hazmat suit because there was so many possible infections happening. My aunt was in so much pain, and the nurse was like, we're gonna have to amputate everybody in this ward because we can't give them surgery. Because right now, the only people we're having surgery for is if you're like actually dying at that moment because we have no electricity. Right? Okay, so that's my experience. That's the experience of most every Puerto Rican you talk to, especially the diaspora. We feel guilty we're not there. We've all lost someone in our family. Puerto Rico is this crazy debt that we don't own. I say the United States owes us reparations. We don't owe $1 that debt because of what they've extracted from us. Over 400,000 people have left the island. They're saying in the next 5 years, half the island will have been gone. And banks are now seizing homes because people can't find the title for their home. And anybody who's from the Caribbean knows that in your family, the house just gets passed down. There's no paperwork. It's the family house. You live live there, he lives there, and y'all are gonna live there. So they're taking people's houses because they can't come up with the title or the deed, because everything was destroyed. They've closed 400 schools. The University of Puerto Rico quadrupled its tuition. 27,000 businesses are gone. And what is happening in Puerto Rico is an influx of young white men doing the cryptocurrency. Naomi Klein talks about it so eloquently in her book, The Battle for Paradise. And they want to start their own community. Because in Puerto Rico, as an American citizen, all of us, those of us who are quote American citizens, if we want to live in Puerto Rico, we can live in Puerto Rico. We just have to live there 158 days, and then we don't pay taxes. So that's what happens. So we have a lot of these young white men on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency that spend half the year in Puerto Rico, so they don't have to pay any taxes. And in the United States, in Puerto Rico, quote, our people don't get taxed, but they do get taxed. So being in Puerto Rico was, first I was lucky. I was very lucky that I have a long track in organizing, and it was actually Eve Ensler, the founder of V-Day, that was like, you need to go down there, come get this money and go put a team together. Because I was like, I don't think I can handle it, because to this day I have not returned to New Orleans after covering Katrina. Very traumatic, and I'm like, this is my people. But we were there for 12 days, and we were the first group of journalists to say, there's more than 67 deaths. And the reason we were able to say that is we went to the Institute for Forensic Studies. You can see this on my website, pronthemap.com. When we went there were 6 trailers, like huge trailers, and everybody in the town was like, that's not supplies, that's dead bodies in there. And we started talking to people, and they were telling us, oh, the government came last week with the ashes of my brother, or my uncle, or my aunt, with some paperwork. So first, since Puerto Rico is very Catholic, I'm not, but most Puerto Ricans are, the idea of like cremation and not seeing your relative's body is very devastating. And this woman was like, there's no like supplies in there, that's all dead bodies. And she goes, come back tonight at 2 a.m. because that's when they bring the bodies out. And we went back and we flew a drone. And we have the footage of them bringing corpses out. So I started saying online, this is a lie, there's no way 67 people died. I got a call from the New York Times. How can you prove this? Because I'm here right now, like I'm here on the ground and I believe my people. I also have drone footage and they're like, that's not enough. It's whatever. But 4 months later, Harvard's like, oh yeah, we count at least 4,446. And again, we did not go to every municipality. They're doing that now. And that's why we know the numbers will go up. So the reason I talked long on that was because when I left Puerto Rico, I was actually energized in this way. For all the years I have been born in Puerto Rico, people would say, we can't survive without the U.S. government. And you would go, don't you want to be free? Let's be free. We need to be independent. We can't survive with the U.S. government. We need them. And what we showed after Hurricane Maria is we could totally survive without the U.S. government. That Puerto Rico is the place right now that could change, particularly the Caribbean and North America, around the climate catastrophe. Why? Because people are now being forced not to depend on an electrical grid or someone bringing in food. We're going to reclaim the farms and grow our food. Vegetation comes back. We're an island. We don't need an electrical grid. We can use solar power. We can build our own houses again. And the mindset of Puerto Ricans has changed from the colonized mind to now the free mind. And Puerto Rico is the perfect example of that. So I tell everybody, yes, go to Puerto Rico. go and be on our island and see the innovation that's happening, and pick a group that you will support that is not funded by like this huge nonprofit industrial complex. That the people, especially the young people in Puerto Rico, are literally doing for self, which to me, this is what freedom looks like. The ability to live on land, to have self-determination. And it's not about hope, it's what's gonna happen regardless of everything coming at us. Thank you.